Well, young man, nephew and relation, your subject tonight is Encounters with the Lord, Ephphatha, be opened. Thank you in anticipation.
Thank you, Uncle Max. Young man, yourself. I'm not sure how long I can hold on to that, but I'll take it. I'll take it tonight, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me back. For not changing the syllabus, I suppose. It would have been difficult to keep me away. Tonight we're going into Mark 7 and another story, another encounter of someone with Jesus. Now, on Wednesday nights between school and a late dinner, Bella, our eldest daughter, goes to Croydon Park every Wednesday to learn Auslan, Australian Sign Language. She's been doing that at Melbourne Heritage. They teach that as their second language. So all of the students learn Auslan. They have at least two hearing impaired teachers that teach at the school as well. And so there's this beautiful thing that goes on where you see the children talking to the teachers in silence, and the children often talking to themselves in silence as they grow in this skill, in this capability to speak with someone who can't hear. And I'm super proud of Belle. She wants to, the reason she's still doing it now that we've moved, she'd love to be an Auslan interpreter. So she would love to, particularly she's very theatrical and loves drama. I've no idea where she gets it from. But she would love to interpret for musicals and for theatre, for shows. So whenever there's a row of shows on, in a musical or theatre, there are some which are set up for the hearing impaired. And so there'll be an Auslan interpreter over to the side, signing the whole time, giving them, letting those people enjoy the show as well and understand the dialogue. So I think it's a wonderful grace that you can extend to someone by learning, by taking time to learn a skill to articulate yourself in a way that you can communicate with them, that they can understand, when otherwise they can't. And to be able to have that skill to open up a world of knowledge and of song and of music and poetry to someone else. It's a beautiful thing to do. And tonight we're going to look at Jesus performing some sign language. So what was it like to be deaf in the first century? Well, people thought you were crazy. Think about it. You can't communicate. You can't hear. Often, especially someone born deaf, very difficult for them to speak. They were usually unemployed, unemployable. They weren't allowed into the temple. So again, like the leper from last week, they weren't allowed into the community of faith. There was little or very crude sign language at the time, and so they were very lonely. So this is what it's like to be a leper. So we'll pick up the story in verse 32 of Mark 7. And they brought to him a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment, and they begged him to lay his hands on him. And taking him aside from the crowd privately, he put his fingers into his ears, and after spitting, touched his tongue. So there's a bit to unpack here. It's pretty interesting. So the first thing is to know he takes him aside. So imagine again, there's this crowd of people, a throng of people around him. Some friends bring this man to Jesus. And he immediately sums up the situation, knows what's going on. He says, I'm going to take this man aside into the quiet, if you like, into a space just between him and me. This interaction is going to be very personal. And the crowd, you can again imagine keeping their distance, but watching this go on. And Mark's recording this from another eyewitness account. And so you presume that they can't hear what's going on over there. Right? There's this silent interaction. The Bible I'm reading from tonight actually is a red letter, and there's only two, in this whole story, there's just 3 words in red that Jesus says. And both of them he says to the deaf man. Right, so he takes him aside a little way, and we're going to look at this picture unfold before us. Now, remember, we've got 3 things to keep in mind when we're looking at Jesus in the Gospels. Right? Number 1, we spoke about last week. Number 1, that he is the physical embodiment of the divine. Right? We are looking at Emmanuel. This is how God will interact with this man. Number 2, that he is a human, that he's one of us, that he can empathise with us, that he has that human connection as a priest. And number 3 is that he's alive. He's still alive. He's the same yesterday, today and forever. And what we see him do, what we see God do through him, God is still doing through him in our lives today. So let's keep these things in mind as we go through. So this man is deaf, and Jesus is going to, I think this is beautiful, because he's going to give him the grace of, he's going to sign for him. He's going to give him sign language. He's going to express what's going on physically to tell the man what's going on. So he puts his fingers in his ears. Right, again, Jesus is very tactile. Right, he puts his fingers in his ears. Right, I'm going to open your ears. Okay, he spits. Just asterisk that for a second, because we're not so used to that in the doctors when you go and see a doctor today. And then he touches the man's tongue. Right, I'm going to open your ears. I'm going to loose your tongue. I know you're not crazy. I know what's going on. You can't hear. You can't speak. I know what we're working with here. Now, with the spitting, one likely reason that he spits is that both the Roman and the rabbinical teachers of the day thought that spit had a very... they saw it differently than we do today. It had a very high quality, particularly in healing. So when Jesus spits, it's warming the man up to say, I'm going to heal. This is something that we're going to do. You remember when he does, I think it's in the next couple of chapters, he heals a blind man by spitting into the dust and making mud and putting it on his eyes. To us, that sounds very strange. But in the first century, spittle, and just so you know, spittle after fasting is the most potent, was the main ingredient in treating eye conditions in the day. All right? So he's not doing something completely out of the ordinary. When he spits, people would understand a healing is about to take place. Right? The doctor is in the house, as it were. We've got these great old quotes from Pliny the Elder, who's just a generation just after Christ, praising the therapeutic powers of human saliva in his book Natural History. He says, not only is it the best of all safeguards against serpents, it's good to know, but daily experience is teaching that it has many other advantages. The Romans spat upon the victim of an epileptic fit. They spat to ward off bad luck that follows meeting a person with a lame right leg. They spat into their right shoe before putting it on in the morning for good luck. And like we said, they treated eye conditions with a potion that was saliva-based. So Jesus is using this to communicate that he's going to heal. Right? So the man understands what's going on. That's how that would have naturally been interpreted by the man and everyone that was around him. And again, I think we see Jesus co-opting the culture of the day. Right? He's not aloof. Okay, he meets the man where he's at. He's going to speak to him in a way he can understand, and he's connected to the thought and the culture of the day. Right? So he doesn't think to himself, this spitting is ridiculous. It's a way that he can He understands his culture, and people can understand him. Now that's important for us too when we're engaging with each other and with other people, is to speak and act in a way that is relevant, makes sense in their world and in their culture. Please don't spit on people that you're trying to help these days. We can't copy and paste that, but we can copy and paste the idea, right? The concept is that we're preparing, he was preparing them for the healing. Now, this man's anticipation is building. His eyes are fixed on Jesus. He's probably trying to read his lips. And then Jesus looks up, directing him to the Father. Okay, what I'm about to do, this is God doing. Right? This is from God. Do you understand? I'm going to be the vehicle of God's power and compassion for you. Right? He wants to say something. He wants to open your ears and he wants to loose your tongue. So his fingers in the ears, spit, hand on the tongue, and then he's looking up. Right? So he's building this picture for the man of what's about to happen. And that's a wonderful way to help someone. Right? To be the mediator between them and God, the conduit, to connect someone to God. You know, what I'm doing, I'm trying to help you in this, I'm partnering with God in this. For us, it might look something like asking to pray with someone, or to go on a long walk together, or to share a meal together. But we're going to join with God in doing this. I want to bring God to this situation, is what Jesus is saying. Showing love and compassion and good works, but attributing it to God, right? Bringing God into the conversation. I love the concept of living a life that demands a gospel answer. So we're told to be always ready to give an answer of the hope that is within you. Right? That denotes that someone asked if you're going to answer. So I love the idea that you are living a life, you're living in a way that someone would ask you, why? Why are you doing this? Right? It's an unusual thing to do. And the answer, this will be a bit scripted, but I'm doing this because I am a child of God, right? And I'm in partnership with him, and this is the sort of thing that he does. This is the sort of thing that he's invited me to do with him together. So that's why I'm acting like this. That's why I'm doing this. It's interesting that when Jesus does his miracles, he never, or very rarely, does the same thing twice, or heals someone the same way twice. He heals people in different ways, all the time. It's not like he has one method that he uses for the blind, one method he uses for the deaf, one for the leper, one story he continually rolls out for the oppressed, right? Sometimes it's with a touch. Sometimes he just speaks. Sometimes they're right next to him. Sometimes, like in the story just before this one, they're a suburb away. Sometimes he rebukes a demon. Sometimes he forgives them first. There was a time when he spat on the ground and made mud for someone's eyes. Another woman just reached out and touched the corner of his coat. Okay, there's a great diversity in the way that Jesus engages with people. I think there's at least two things we can take away from that. Number one is, well, Jesus, as the embodiment of God, is endlessly creative. Okay, God rarely does the same thing twice. I mean, I'm looking at a room full of very different people. Not one of you are the same. Look at creation and the incredible diversity and complexity of God's work. Right? He never runs out of ideas. He never runs out of time. He never runs out of resources. Right? He's endlessly creative, and he loves to do that. He makes all of us in a special way with a special role to play. The second thing is is that every experience people have with Jesus appears to be tailor-made for them. I think that's really important. Jesus deals with different people differently. And all people are different people. He comes to where they are. He comes to their level. He comes to where they can understand. He meets us right where we are. It's important to understand. Jesus treats you differently than he treats me. Right? He's the same person, but he treats us differently because we are different. He doesn't have a cookie-cutter approach to discipleship. You can see that even with his very close followers. He treats everyone differently according to who they are, what they need at the time. So I think that's really good to keep in mind when we're looking at our own lives, when we're looking at other people's lives, that our relationships with God and the way that he interacts with us, they can look different. Right? And not only is that okay, that's much more interesting. Right? That's a wonderful thing that God would work with each of us and our stories in a different way. I think that if we spent the rest of the year just hearing from everyone in this room about their story, of their history, who God is to them, what their favourite scriptures are that speak to them of God, what their favourite memories are, the times that they felt that God has had a huge influence in their life, when he was really there for them, or when he instructed them or apprenticed them. Those stories would all be unique and they'd be diverse. If we put them all together, we'd probably have something that looks a bit like the Bible. I mean, that's what this book is, right? It's a book written by lots of people over thousands of years as they put in orally or put down in word their impressions, their view, their beliefs about God and how he acted in the world. Right? We've got a living Bible in front of us, and it would be the most interesting, colourful book, I think, that you could read. I think that would really enrich our view of God and our view of each other, to see how God works with us individually as he apprentices us to Jesus. We'll keep going in verse 34. As I said, he's looking up to heaven. He sighed and he said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. He sighed. Now, most of the other versions say that it's a deep sigh or it's a groan. And it looks like that's what the word means. It means a groan, like there's an anguished element to it. Paul uses the word in Romans, same word, when he says, we groan as we're waiting for the manifestation for the sons of God. Like it's a distressed groan. It's a distressed groan, right? It's like, I can't wait for the new thing. I can't wait for what we will be. So he's about to heal a man who's deaf and mute. Why is he groaning like that? Why is there this anguish component to him? I think what's going on is that Jesus is identifying with the man before he heals him. That this whole process is him joining himself to the man. Okay, he takes him aside, away from everyone else. It's just the two of them. He puts his fingers in his ears. He connects their mouths. Right, he's connecting them. They're becoming one. And then he looks up to the Father and groans. Right? I think he's entered right into the feelings of that man. Right? And he's looking up, and the man's in front of me, he's looking up in prayer, and he just groans to God. And God is looking down, as it were, and he sees his son in distress and heals him. And when he's healing him, the man is healed because they're connected, because they're now one. Right? He was in Christ, if you like. Christ was bringing the man to God. So God hears the cry of his son and heals him, and heals the man. And Christ, again, he's the conduit between the human and the divine. Right? He's that perfect high priest who brought him to God and then brought God down to him. He empathised with this man. He joined in his pain and his suffering, and then he cries to God, help. Right? So the Lord, it's like he takes that man into his soul. He feels what it's like to be deaf, to be cut off from communication. He imagines what it's like not to be able to hear, not to be able to hear from his Father. This man, he's never heard the Torah spoken. He's never heard the Psalms. He's never heard the prophets. Right? He lived before all the Bible was written down. This was an oral tradition, and it's an oral culture. He can't hear it. Right? There's fragments of scrolls in his local synagogue, but he's not allowed to pick them up and read them if he can read. And it'd be very surprising if he was literate. This man has very little knowledge of God and what God's about and who he is and what he's doing here. Only what he can pick up from how people act around him. Jesus imagines living like that. Imagine if I couldn't hear from my Father. Right? And that's the anguish of that for him. Right? He draws that man into himself. Matthew 8 verse 16 quotes Isaiah, and he says, that evening they brought to him many who were possessed by demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our illnesses and bore our diseases. Now that's a strange way to say that. Well, we would say he healed our diseases. He cured our illnesses. But Isaiah says he took them. He bore them. He took them and carried them himself. Remember when the woman with the issue of blood touched him? He said, I felt power leave me. Right? He felt something go out of him. That took something from him. Have you ever had that experience? That experience where you enter into someone's problem and take them to God. Right? When you hear about someone's struggle and you take yourself away to a quiet place and you really try and identify with their problem. You try and imagine it. You have empathy. You put yourself in their situation and you feel it. Right? And then you take that feeling, you take that person to God because they're inside of you. Right? You can bring someone to God as if they're in you because you've empathised with them and drawn them and all they're going through into yourself. And you can look up and bring that person to God. It's happened a few times powerfully in my life. One was my best friend's young daughter was diagnosed with leukemia. And it was very serious and very scary. And I have 3 daughters. Our youngest, Eden, ages with his daughter. And it was very easy to imagine in some way what he was going through, what they were feeling. And I remember going out onto our deck, looking up at the scars. I had no words. I was angry. I was frustrated, desperately sad, but just in pain. I had no words to pray to God about it. I just groaned. I just groaned to God. All of that mixed ball of emotions and thoughts and feelings. Imagining what he was going through. And I just sent that groan to heaven. I was empathizing with a fellow human being who I loved. Now, he's told me numerous times that when they were going through her treatment, he said it was a miracle how strong we were. He said, I know that so many people were praying for us. He said, I really believe that helped. And I think it does. I think it does. When we truly connect and empathise with someone and bring them to God in a very deep and a real way, in a Christ-like way, then that works. Perhaps this is what Paul's talking about when he says in Romans 8 that the Spirit helps us in our weakness. For we do not know what to pray as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. I'll read you a section of that from a different translation. Meanwhile, the moment we get tired in waiting, God's right alongside us, helping us along. If we don't know how or what to pray, that's okay. He does our praying in and for us, making prayer out of wordless sighs or aching groans. He knows us far better than we know ourselves, knows our pregnant condition, and keeps us present before God. That's why we can be so sure that every detail in our lives of love for God is worked into something good. That's Romans 8, verses 26 to 28. Sometimes it's really hard to articulate what we're going through. And that's okay. God can understand a knotted mess of thoughts and feelings. But we can just look up and give him that. Turn to him in whatever state we are. Jesus groaned. Do you remember at the tomb of Lazarus? He's standing at the front and he knows with a certainty that he is about to raise Lazarus from the dead and that he's about to walk out of that tomb and glorify God. And Jesus wept. He's about to see his friend again. He's about to defeat death and bring life. That's what this whole mission was about. He's about to do it. And he's bawling his eyes out. Why? Well, he sees the effect that it has on people. These people were his friends. They're people that he loved. He enters into that feeling. He enters into the feeling of the loss of a loved one, the loss of a brother. He felt it. He loved Lazarus. He felt it himself. He is the human one expressing the divine character, the divine emotions. Right? God knows us intimately, and he feels it. He weeps when people die. He thinks about Lazarus. He knows himself that he's not far away from being put into a grave. He thinks of his death. He thinks of death in general and and all that that's meant for human history, what that will mean for his followers, what they'll go through, and taking on all of that, taking it all into himself, identifying with the sobbing, confused mess of humanity around that tomb. He just breaks down. That is your God. He's not a black and white photo. He's not words on a page. He's a complete and vibrant personality with feelings and emotions. And then he calls to a dead man and he walks out of the grave. God understands. He gets it. For we don't have a high priest who can't be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, but he can sympathise with our weakness. We have one who in every respect has been tempted like we are, and yet without sin. I'm sure I learnt that verse in Side Room 3, 30 years ago. And we use it a lot to talk about, the theological truth that Jesus was a human being, and that's good, that's true. But there's such a deeper level to that. What did it mean that he was human? What did it mean that he was one of us? What did it mean for how he relates to our weakness? Well, he understands. Like, really. He knows how it feels. He understands why you sin. Like, really. And it's not that God doesn't. Jesus is embodying, he's demonstrating what God already knows and feels. There's nothing that you're going through that he can't identify with. What's your trial? Is it loneliness? Are you poor? Are you rich? Are you misunderstood? Are you tired? Overburdened? Are you under pressure? Are you wrestling with God? Wrestling with his will? Does it feel like God's left you? He's been there. He's felt all of that. That's pretty incredible. He's not distant. He's right there with you. He understands. Right? He doesn't just, I said this last week, he doesn't just heal and forgive and give strength to you because that's his role, because that's his job description. He just lives like that. Remember, he is the I am. He loves you. Right? God loves to do this. It brings him exceeding joy to present you faultless before God. God is a pleasure seeker, and it's our Father's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. Like, it's hard work, right? He's emotionally invested. He gets very attached to us, and he rides the highs and the lows, but it gives his life purpose. That's his purpose. It's his will that gives him satisfaction. It's rewarding for him. It's probably the most rewarding thing that you and I can do as human beings. To empathise with someone. To join them in solidarity in their mess. And to help them up and out. To bring them back to God. To bring them back to their destiny as image-bearing creation. How did God rescue us? Was Was it from a distance? Right? Did he drop down leaflets from heaven with sort of a 5-point action plan on how you could be saved? With some sort of procedure that works for everyone? No. He sent Jesus. Right? The Word made flesh. He sent his Son as a human being into the muck and the mire of our desperate situation. He joined us in the trenches. And he was moved with compassion. He loved us. And he sacrificed himself for us. I mean, that's how it's done, right? If you want to help someone, that's how it's done. You don't just throw platitudes on someone's Facebook wall and say something like, all things work together for good and this will make sense at some stage. That's true, and it might be good at the right time, but what you need is just for someone to sit with you in the darkness for a bit. Have you heard of the Jewish tradition of sitting Shiva? So there's a lot of wisdom in this. So when in the Jewish community, and this is hundreds of years old, when someone loses a loved one, their close family and friends, their community, for 7 days, they go around to their house, and the person who's grieving is, you know who they are because they're sitting either on the floor or on a small chair designed especially for grieving. They're low to the ground. They're signifying that they're feeling low. They're abased. And you sit next to them on the ground. And you're not allowed to say anything unless they open up the conversation to you. You come in, you sit with them in their grief, in their darkness. There's no words, so you don't say any. You're just sitting in solidarity, joining with them in their darkest moment. It's a beautiful practice. And it's often the best thing to do when someone is going through hard times or to grief, is just to join them there. I'm here. I'm here with you. There'll be time for words. There'll be time for helping and for action. Looking up to heaven, he sighed and says to the deaf man, Ephatha, that is, be opened. Right? Jesus can speak to the deaf. Jesus can speak to the dead. That's not a problem. Appreciate Uncle Max prayed for us all tonight that our ears would be opened and that my tongue would be loosed. There are reasons, all kinds of reasons and times that our ears are closed, and that'd be a prayer to pray every morning. God, open my ears so I can hear what you say. I want to hear your truth. I want to understand what you have for me today, what you're saying today to me. Right? Because our ears, they get blocked. They get blocked. Our spiritual ears. Now, let's remember, we've woven in there that, that when we're looking at Christ, we are looking at the embodiment of the divine. We've seen that he is a human, identifying with us and bringing us to God. Now I want you to remember that he's alive. And what we've seen him do for that man, what we saw him do for the leper last week, he is ready and willing to do for you. I want you to imagine that you're that man, that you are brought before him in this crowd, in this world. He brings you aside, he brings you into a quiet place, just you and him. And looking into your eyes, he joins himself to you. Whatever you're going through at the moment, whatever your particular situation is, he empathizes with that and joins with you in that. Like, he knows your deepest secrets. He knows you. He knows your will and your desire. He knows who you really are better than yourself. And he takes all of that into himself and he brings it to God. He takes all of you, all the pain, all the worry, all the sin, all of the joy, all of the excitement, all of the ambition. He can bring all of that to his Father. He is that conduit. He is continually interceding for us. You know, Jesus said to his disciples, they were worried that he had to go. He was saying, I'm going to die and then I won't be with you. I won't be with you for much longer, he says. And they're distressed at that. But he says, actually, you should be rejoicing. Because if I go to the Father, then I'll come to you again in a much more accessible way. Right now, if you want to speak to Jesus, or you want him to intercede for you, you want him to bring you to God like he did with the deaf man, you have to be there. He's a physical man standing in front of you. You have to be within earshot to hear him. You have to be close to him to experience him. But he says, I'm going to the Father so that when I'm in the Father, I become, he says, or John's words, a life-giving spirit. So I am now available to everyone through all time. Right, he says, where two or three are gathered together, I'll be there. He walks amongst the ecclesias, amongst the lampstands. He is now omnipresent in the same way that God is. So his gift to us is that we can engage with him in the same way that these men engaged with him 2,000 years ago. He is alive and he's present. In verse 37 it says, they were astonished beyond measure, saying, he has done all things well. Right? He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. They were astonished beyond measure. I don't know if you've ever been astonished beyond measure, but I don't think it would come up very often. The people saw how he handled that man, as we have, and it was beautiful. Right? It wasn't just the physical healing, it wasn't just the power. They asked him to lay his hands on this man and heal him. But he did so much more than that. And they looked at all of that from a short distance and they said, that was well done. You know, it reminds me of at the end of creation, right? The account says it was very good. Like, and you can imagine all the power associated with that creation. Like the light and the darkness and the mountains coming up out of the ocean and the verdure just covering this whole, all the power involved in that. But the commentary is, that was beautifully done. Like the way that all works together, the way that it looked, the poetry of all that, it was just well done. That was very good. Right? And it's like these people are watching the new creation. They're watching the Son of God. They're watching how he recreates, and they look at it and they say, that was very good. That was very good. He connected to his Father. He had the words to speak at the right time to those who were weary. You know, he spoke beautifully to that man without saying a word. So, may you give him your pain and your sin and your burdens. May you invite him into your joy and your celebration and your anticipation. May you bring your friends to Jesus and let him take us to his Father and to our Father. And may your ears be opened to the truth that you are clean, that you are a beloved daughter, that you're a beloved son, and that God is so pleased with you in his Son. Again, if there's some comments and questions, I'd love that.
We have a few minutes if there's any. Let's take questions first, please. Curly questions, if you can. Yeah, we discussed this a little bit last week, actually, afterwards. It's a funny thing because, yeah, we discussed that a little bit last week, so you can jump on the video and check that out. But it's interesting, right? Because he heals, he gives a man hearing and gives a man speech, and then tells him to be quiet. So there's a bit of humour in there, I think. But probably the same way he would have empathised with the situation. Sure, some disappointment perhaps, and it wasn't ideal for him and what he was trying to do and his mission. I think briefly he was I think trying to keep the mission on trajectory. He knew he had to go to the cross, and that if popularity got too out of control too early, then that's problematic with the Romans, who aren't super keen on popular rabbis with thousands of people gathering around them, talking about a new kingdom, and obviously with the Jewish leaders as well, who ended up being the ones to take him out. So I think he's trying to keep a lid on the ministry in some capacity. It's almost like it's like the wedding of Cana, when he says to Mary, "Look, I'm not ready to do this yet. It's not my time." But then, for some reason, he does it anyway. I think it's just because, again, that's who he is, and so he sees this man, and if he applied all his thinking and logic, he goes, "Well, if I do this, it's not in my best interest at the moment." But he just does it. He can't help himself, if you like. Something like that. I think he would have been pretty happy with the man as well. Maybe he said all that with a smile and a wink. I don't know.
Maybe the purpose was that the man had to go back to the synagogue to re-establish his worship of God, or establish it rather. And it wasn't being a witness to all those around him. Just that was turned up. That would have been a critical thing, more so than the crowds around him to appreciate that. But importantly was that it had turned his appreciation to the worship of him, worship of God.
Yeah, interestingly, it doesn't seem to say that he told him to be quiet like he did the leper last time. It says he said to them, talking to the crowd, so those that are around, he's trying to keep it down. But yeah, he can certainly speak his testimony as to what happened. Yeah.
Perhaps Jesus was also wanting the recipient of the gift of the Spirit to think about what had actually happened to him. Not look at the dramatic thing, not look at the miracle as a dramatic thing so much, but
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. Like, imagine, like, if this is his first time hearing, I mean, what are the first words he's going to hear? Maybe best he, listens to Jesus for a bit longer before running off. I don't know. Yeah.
It's interesting, Jesus learned all these things as he grew up, as he developed, as he grew in favour with God and man. It wasn't as if he came to this earth ready-made. I think he sort of captures this a little bit, but does show in some sense how Jesus listened and heard from his Father as well, so that he could listen and hear from others. Isaiah 50, verse 4 to 7 says, "And the Lord hath given me the tongue of a learner, that I should know how to speak and learn in season to him that is weary. He waketh morning by morning. He waketh my ear to hear as to learn. Lord God, open my ear, and I was not rebellious, I will turn way back." So Jesus learned that he had his ear open to his Father. And that's how he grew.
Yeah, how good. The Father, Ephrath, opened his ear. Which is great, because he's just saying that God opened my ear. So he's putting the initiative onto God. God did that. And he did that for this man. So yeah, that's probably the best way for us to have our ears open, is to ask for God to do that. All right. Thank you very much again. I'll speak to you just after.
Thank you, Brother Cameron. I think, if I might say so, you have a contemplative style which goes in very deep into the circumstances of the miracles that you've presented to us in these 2 nights. And on everybody's behalf, I thank you for what I understand was a reasonably impromptu request to come and help us, though you've probably given those talks before. Thank you. The announcements, God willing, are as follows. The next class, next Wednesday, is under the theme Walking in the Light. Walking in the Light. And Brother Jeff Lyons is to be the leader. Now, I think Help Us Israel is on Friday at 11, right, in the hall here. To exhort on Sunday is Brother Adrian. And the subject for Sunday evening is, why don't we go to heaven when we die? And I have to answer that question. I'm tempted to say something, but I won't. All right, we'll close with prayer. Our Father in heaven, we are grateful for this quiet hour, this time around this word preserved for us to study in our time. We did not see our Lord. We did not hear him. He did not touch us. We did not see the crowds. We did not see the influences upon him. But we believe that Jesus Christ came into this world, that he was thy Son by the begetting of the Holy Spirit, that he lived and walked amongst his people for 30 and more years, without sin, a great teacher, a speaker of parables, and one, as we've learnt this night, who empathised with his fellow man. because he represented thee as thy dear Son, and yet as Son of Man, he could feel and understand the plight of those around him. And so he does for us. Help us, though we have not seen, to be faithful, to believe nevertheless, and go forward day by day as if we do. So, our Father, be with us in our walk in the truth. Help us to see the goal ahead of thy kingdom, promised from the times of the prophets. And we know Jesus Christ is coming. It is only a matter of time, because this earth, if he does not come, must indeed come to a sorry end. Thy purpose is to save, gracious Father. You did make this earth to be inhabited. So we know and we are assured that the kingdom is nigh. We thank thee again for this night, for the ministrations of Brother Cameron. We thank thee for each other, that we can share and empathise with all these things that we've learnt from thy word. We are a special and peculiar people, and yet we are saved by grace. We seek thee and offer our thanks and praise through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.